Hi, welcome back to my YouTube channel. If you don't know me, my name is Mario. I'm a senior clinical research associate. I put out videos on clinical research, personal finance, and travel. And in today's video, I am going to talk all about the pre-study visit. How do I conduct the pre-study visit? I have an overview video as well. This is going to be much more in depth. I will go through a little bit about what you should do before your pre-study visit, how you should go about conducting your pre-study visit, what you should do to follow up after the pre-study visit. So without further ado, let me start with how you prepare for a pre-study visit. Now, this is going to depend a little bit on what type of company you are with. If you're with a smaller company, if you're with a larger company. Some companies have some of these tasks done by clinical trial associates or equivalent. So just bear with me as I mention some things that may not fall into the quote unquote CRA role. So the first thing you want to do once you get a site assigned is review the investigator. Is the investigator qualified to run the study? Is the investigator on any debarred lists from participating in clinical research? Has the site have any public known issues? You go through the databases, you confirm and make sure that the investigator is qualified. You review the investigator CV, make sure that the investigator has relevant experience, that the investigator is fully able and qualified to run the study. You can also look up front for things like GCP certificates and other such things that the investigators would have, a medical license, etc. So I'm not going to go too much in depth into just the collection of documents. That's a huge part of pre-study visits. But in general, I will say at minimum, you need to make sure that the investigator is not debarred. You should have a site feasibility questionnaire from the site to ask where they filled out some of their basics in terms of if they were interested in participating and a little bit about their site, what type of IRBs they use, etc. So ideally, you'd have the site feasibility questionnaire handy, and those are just the things you need to get started. Most places have a checklist of documents that need to be collected based on requirements, but those are some of those that will fall into that. Usually, a CTA will be taking care of most of these things, checking the databases, making sure the investigators aren't debarred, collecting documents. So then you, as the CRA, are told, hey, it's your turn to conduct the pre-study visit. So the first thing I do is I go and look at the site feasibility questionnaire, the site completed one, and just read to get a brief sense of what's the site like. If you're at a big CRO, you have the advantage of asking colleagues and asking with other people, hey, have you worked with the site? How's the site? That is usually extremely valuable feedback because CRAs that monitor a site will tell you pretty much everything you need to know, what you should be on the lookout for, whether the site's good, whether the PI is generally available. You can get all that information much easier for someone that has worked with the site previously. But even if you don't have that information, just get some familiarity. I also like to go on to the websites of the sites if they have them up and to see what they have, so I get some familiarity with the site. It's think of it sort of as your homework before the date of the pre-study visit. Just get a little bit of information and familiarity, so you gather that. The other thing that I like to do personally is go through the visit annotation reports, which you'll have for your pre-study visit. In most places, they'll give you an annotated report of what they expect for your report. And then I created my own checklist of things that I need to ask based on that annotated report. And usually the annotated report is pretty comprehensive. So if you're basing everything to ask on that annotated report, you'll make sure you get to all the important points. So this is now I'm familiar with the site. I've gathered my information. The investigator is not debarred. We have basic documents, possibly the CV, medical license, GCP that I've reviewed. I've reviewed the site visibility questionnaire. I then like to go and refresh myself on the PowerPoint presentation that we're given. So CRAs are often given PowerPoint presentations to give at the pre-study visit. I like to go through that and thinking through it based on what I know about the site. Where should I interject questions into this PowerPoint presentation? So you can create sort of mental stop points where you'll ask sites questions. Otherwise, in my experience, it feels more like a rapid fire question after question after question at the end of the visit of things you didn't cover. There is some of that, and the pre-study visit is not, especially in lately done remotely, it's really hard not to make it feel like question after question after question. But the best way to do this is to intersperse your questions based on the slide deck and trying to figure out where questions would fit in. So I actually have a pre-study checklist here that I created for a study. This is some of the basic things. So there's nothing study specific in this checklist. So I didn't want to share anything that could potentially be identifiable to studies I've worked on. Obviously, if you watch my channel, you know I worked exclusively in my career in oncology. So this is an oncology study. So it was almost everything I did for the last 15 years. So this is an oncology study. There's nothing oncology specific though. The first thing you should be asking and aware of is if your site has satellite sites. If the site does have satellite sites, they usually will have an SOP in place saying how the PI has oversight. In my experience, most of the time, the way that the PI has oversight of satellite sites is by delegating oversight to a sub-I, and then they have occasional meetings with the PI, so the PI is readily available. That's probably the best way to do oversight because I've run into PIs that claim to have oversight of satellite sites that they never visit. That's a lot harder to show how the PI has oversight. So if you run into a PI that doesn't go to these satellite sites, the best oversight is delegation to the sub-I, and then an occasional meeting with the PI to discuss the study, etc. And for virtually every study, they're going to ask if they have any competing studies. Does this study that you're about to evaluate the site for, are they going to be other studies at the site that will compete with that study, making enrollment difficult? That's something that is a little hard at pre-study visits just because sites don't necessarily know if they what they have opened or what they'll have open when the study comes to fruition. So they might say, yes, we have a competing study now, but that study is scheduled to close in 1 month and you're at the pre-study visit, so the study is presumably not going to be running. Sites will be pretty upfront about this. I've had sites say just that, hey, we do have a competing study right now. It's closing in a month. I've also had sites say, we have a competing study. We cannot take on the study because the eligibility criteria is exactly the same for the both studies, and we don't want to open both at the same time. Yeah, so sites are pretty upfront. It's in everyone's best interest for sites not to take on studies where they have tons of competing studies for the same population. The other thing you should be concerned about is FDA audits and inspections. Has the site gotten a 483? So I should back up for a second. So has the site been FDA audited? And if so, have they gotten a 483? So the answer so far is about 50-50. I would say about 50% of the sites that I have worked with have never had an FDA audit. About 50% have had some form of FDA audit. Many times it's the site that has had the audit and not necessarily the PI. But whatever you can get in terms of if the site has had a 483, and if they have had a 483, what was their response? They should be able to provide you with how they responded to the findings in the 483. It's not a gigantic concern if sites have had a 483. It's just to be aware, the FYI, this was a problem that was identified. The site has put in place a corrective action. We are aware of this and we know to watch out for this. So that's the FDA audits, inspections, 483s, etc. The other things that will be at pretty much every both pre-study and SIV visit is informed consent. Sites generally have an informed consent SOP. I like to ask at all my visits, hi, can you please walk me through how an individual would be consented at your site? How would you identify the subject? How would you present the protocol, the consent form to them and the study to them? How would you make sure that they comprehend it? They comprehend the informed consent. Who's there, who signs off. Most places don't require PI signature, so it's often the coordinator, but they'll say the PI is available to answer questions about the study, etc. So in detail, what is the process for informed consent, and if you can, obtain a copy of the site informed consent SOP and review it, and make sure what's written is what they told you and that they match. The other thing around informed consent is translations. Depending on what sites you're working with, be pretty clear. Hey, will you need translations? For example, if you're in Hialeah, which is the Cuban section of Miami, you're going to need Spanish. So just make sure you're aware of that. I know some places uh, require different languages, so as much as you can find this kind of information up front, the easier it is to assess the site. Hey, if we choose your site, we fully understand that most of your population is Spanish speaking, so we will make sure to ask for translations up front. So that's all I have to say are really the informed consent. Get the SOP, figure out if the site needs translations, figure out if the site needs specific language within their informed consent. This is not something that I would go too much in depth into in the pre-study visit, but does your IRB have any specific requirements for informed consent that we should be aware of? A question like that, oftentimes the answer is no. However, I have run into a few sites in my past where they will say, yes, it needs to be reviewed by the study team before submission to the IRB. So just be aware that there's an additional week where the study team reviews it before it can go to an IRB or something of that nature. So that's the informed consent. Then you can ask about the contracts and budgets and IRBs. Can you have contracts and budgets done in parallel? With an IRB submission, you do the contract budget first and then the IRB submission. How does that work at your site? What's the process? The more you can find out about things like that upfront, the easier it is. So if you don't have a working relationship where you already know all this for a site, it's good to know if you can do things in parallel or if one needs to be done first and then the next. And you'll get both answers. Some sites will say contracts and budgets, and then until that's done, we don't do anything. Some will say, yeah, we can do some submissions as the contracts and budgets are negotiated. So like I said, just find out that information. Doesn't matter what it is, just make sure you know it. The other thing that you want to spend some time for, now that we've gone over informed consents, is the recruitment. How are subjects going to be recruited for the study? Does the site have the population that the study needs? Are there any specific challenges? Do sites have databases that they can refer to? Do they need advertising? Do they do community outreach to physicians? How do you go about ensuring that your site can recruit what you say they can onto the study? We've gone more and more. I've noticed more studies create recruitment plans, discuss this in depth. I have mixed feelings personally about this because in my experience, sites fall into either two extremes. One, that they overpromise on what they can deliver, and then they fall short of their targets constantly, or sites that meet expectations or even exceed them. The sites that meet and exceed expectations, it seems a little onerous to keep asking them, hey, how's recruitment going, etc. Well, you're already exceeding our expectations, so why are we constantly contacting you to ask? But the sites that have problems, you definitely want to work with them closely, and you try to identify this at the pre-study visit. I do like to ask at my visits if the projections are optimistic, if they're realistic, how do they do in past similar studies. And I'll be upfront with the site and say, hey, if you we'll end up doing a lot of outreach to your site if you overpromise and underdeliver. So it's best to be realistic or even slightly conservative on your estimates at this stage. So that's how I go about it. That's my personal preference because I don't necessarily want to constantly have to reach out to sites and be like, hey, I know you said at the pre-study visit that you could enroll 20, but you only have 2 subjects. What's going on here? So more ideal that the number would be more realistic and closer to what they could actually enroll. And sites will overpromise at the pre-study visit, especially if they're eager to get that study. So just ask some questions. How many of X do you see? What's similar study enrollment? Just try to dig a little bit. Is their number really that optimistic or pessimistic, or is it realistic? With experience, you can pretty much tell immediately. But if you're a new CRA, I would definitely start digging into that. So that's the recruitment strategy of the site and how they're going to go about it. The next thing I'll talk about is the investigational product. So this will vary on what the investigational product is, but I spent most of my career in working on oncology drugs, so I'm just going to assume that it's a drug. So if you have an oncology drug, where is it stored? Is it temperature monitored? What sort of temperature monitoring device do you have? How often is it calibrated? All those questions. And a lot of pre-study visits these days are being done remotely. Most of my experience has actually been on site where I can go and see all these things. But if you can't see them, get the calibration records if they provide them for the thermometers. Get information on where the drug is stored. It should be in a secure, limited access location that's temperature monitored. That is the ideal scenario. So that is what you should hear. You'll hear limited access. If you hear that word, ask how is it limited? Is it a key? Do all these certain people have keys? Is it a keypad? All this sort of information. Just think through if you wanted to keep drugs secure and the correct temperature, what sort of questions should you ask to figure out that? And also, while you're thinking of IP, if the site has satellite sites, do they transfer IP from this main site to satellite sites? Or even if they don't have satellite sites, is there any transfer process? And if there is, the sites should have an SOP around how they transfer IP. So if you run into sites that say, yeah, we transfer IP all the time, can I get a copy of your transfer process for IP? And can you walk me through that process? And similarly with destruction, is this drug going to be destroyed on site? Will it need to be returned to the sponsor? Do you have an IP destruction policy that I can have? Can you walk me through the destruction policy? So those are all questions around the IP, transfer, destruction, and making sure that it's stored adequately. So I think those are the high points for IP. The other thing that will come up with IP is accountability logs. Are you going to use sponsor-provided accountability logs? Do you use your own? If you use your own, can you provide them to me so I can review them to make sure that they are sufficient for the study? So those are the things I can think about around IP that I want to cover. So now that we've covered, the IRB, the ICF, the recruitment, and IP, let's go on to the number of studies possibly going on at the site and the investigator qualifications and site personnel qualifications. These are things you should speak to. I try to get at least the CV for the primary investigator and the primary coordinator ahead of time so I can review those two. And then they can walk me through their experience of some of their other staff. Ask questions about how many studies they've been on, how many studies are currently running at your site, how many is the PI, how many studies is the principal investigator, the PI for, and just try to get a sense of what's going on the site. Is everyone overburdened and stressed? Do people have sufficient time to conduct the study? That sort of thing, and how many sub-investigators are going to be put onto this study? What's some of the qualifications of sub-investigators? Is there a regulatory coordinator, etc.? So you're just trying to see that the site has some infrastructure in place, that the PI is qualified, the site staff are qualified, and these are people you want running your trial. So that's that. I like to ask personally if sites know that someone's going to be out of office for a while. For example, maybe someone's pregnant and they know in a few months this person's going to be out of office, and if they know that, what their backup plan is to fill that position, or someone's going out for surgery or whatever. Just ask, hey, do you have any staff with long upcoming absences that you're aware of? It's not super important at the pre-study visit stage because it'll be a while before the site has the site initiation visit. They need to be selected, documents collected, and then the site initiation visit. But it is good to know, just FYI, our person is going to be out of office, from 3 months now to 6 months from now. So just make a note of that. It's good practice. Jumping into source documents. Now, source documents has been a little bit all over the place these days, with sites that are transitioning from paper to EMR, sites that have EMRs and they can give monitors direct access, sites that have EMRs but they can't give monitors access, etc. So I would start with, is your site paper or electronic source or both? If the site says we're 100% paper, you're sort of done there. That means everything's paper. You can ask them if they can accommodate remote monitoring visits and if they're able to upload things into a portal. That's probably the extent. If they say they're 100% paper-based, they're just making sure that there's some mechanism to allow for remote monitoring if the study allows for remote monitoring. If they say we're a hybrid, where paper and electronic, what sort of things are going to be in the EMR, what sort of things are going to be on paper. Oftentimes it's things like MRI, CT scans, pathology reports, those things go into an EMR, and then sites create their own source worksheets, and then they use on paper, and then they use a combination of the two. If you're running into that question, and this is a question I don't see many monitors out there ask, but as soon as the site says we use an EMR, the question that I immediately like to ask is, what system is it? Because that's something I want to document. Is this Epic? Is this Cerner? Is this something we've used like a million times that most CRAs would have experience with? Or is this something a little more obscure? The more obscure system that I've run into a little bit now is called ISALUS. ISALUS. There are a couple of sites using this. It's not a great system for research because it doesn't allow for monitors to have direct access. I went to the ISALUS website and looked up if they were 21 CFR Part 11 compliant, and they're technically never been validated to be 21 CFR Part 11 compliant. So monitors aren't given direct access to that system. So most sites that use that particular EMR still print and create shadow charts because people can't get direct access. So if you hear EMR next to media question, what EMR system? Oftentimes you can research yours on the back end, is this 21 CFR Part 11 compliant? But you can also ask sites, say, hey, do you know this system is 21 CFR Part 11 compliant? If you don't know what that is, I'll just Google it. It basically makes sure that you have unique audit trails for people accessing, so to tell who accessed what document, etc. Within the system. So there's certain verifications that systems need to go through to meet that standard. So the question, if you have direct EMR access, I like to ask, do you have any agreements that monitors need to sign to get direct access to the EMR system? That agreement technically should be reviewed by your company before you just go off and sign it. So if sites say, yes, we have an agreement, if you can get a copy, If they can't give you direct access, do they allow over-the-shoulder access to spot check the EMR? I tend to do this with some of my sites in the past. Every couple of visits, I'll just pick a few random documents, make sure that they are in the EMR, and then I'll pick a few random documents from the EMR and make sure that they're printed, making sure that I have comprehensive source. So those are your source documents. That's paper, that's the hybrid, that's electronic. I think that's really everything. And then source worksheets. Does your site create source worksheets? Most sites will these days. Sponsors, actually, this should be a whole separate video. There's a whole debate in the pharma world about whether sponsors should provide source worksheets or whether sites should make their own. And it varies. Some sites, some companies will provide source worksheets to sites. Some will say make your own. So there's no standard there, but you would know what your company is doing if they're making their own, or do they expect sites to make it. So that is the paper versus EMR or both, how the CRAs will have access. Then if it's paper, where are these source documents stored? Are they, the answer to that question is almost always going to be in a locked research office, but definitely ask it. Where do you store it? I would say 99% of the time I get the answer that during the study they're stored in the primary coordinator's office, which is a locked office space, and that's where they'll be stored. So the other thing is, if your study requires specific equipment, to make sure the site has it. Does your site need a specific type of imaging, CT, MRI, ultrasound? Does your site need specific kind of blood processing? Does it need a specific centrifuge? Does it need specific equipment in the lab? All those types of questions, those are going to be study specific, so I can't go over it because I don't know what study we're talking about. This has all been general, but make sure you understand the specific requirements for your study, and make sure that the site has everything that would be needed to conduct the study. So that's the equipment, and that equipment part is going to be study specific. Whatever study will need their own type of equipment. Then I like to ask about monitoring, and this is really my favorite part, is the CRA. Can you describe your monitoring room, or can I see your monitoring area, depending if you're remote or at the site? How far in advance do you need monitoring visits scheduled? What are your monitoring hours? Is the PI only available on certain days? Do you have Wi-Fi available? Do you have copying available? Is there any limitations that I should be aware of in terms of either PI availability, needing to schedule far in advance? Can your site accommodate co-monitors? All of those questions. I had a site not too long ago make the joke when I asked, where's your monitoring area during the PSV, the site coordinator as well. Well, we like to put our CRAs in the bathroom, and just paused and like dead serious. And, obviously joking, but you'll hear all sorts of stories. But I thought that was pretty funny in the pre-study. But it's like, as the monitor, I'm most interested in hearing about what your marching area is like. And she's like, it's the bathroom. All right, so there's my joke for the day. CRAs are not funny people. So the last thing I can think of off the top of my head, now that we covered the monitoring aspect, is long-term document storage. Where are things going to be stored long-term? I think these are going to fall into one of three answers that you're probably going to get to this question. The most likely is that they store them on site for X number of months and then transfer them to a long-term storage location. For some sites, especially if they're rural, etc., they need to have the documents stored on site indefinitely. They have plenty of space, so they have no reason to transfer them anywhere. So they will respond, we store documents indefinitely as per sponsor instructions. So they'll be here until the sponsor directs us to do something with them. And then the third, which I've encountered a little bit of lately, but less common, is that sites will transfer all of the documents onto hard drives. They'll store everything electronically. They'll create CDs, but they won't retain the paper records. They will have 100% long-term electronic storage. So those are potential ways you could hear about documents being stored long-term. If they do say that they're transferring these documents to a long-term storage location, make sure you know what the name of the long-term storage facility is, where it's located, how will the site get the documents back if needed, how long is that turnaround time, etc. So really, if they say, uh, hey, we move documents to the long-term storage facility, make sure you know how long it would take those documents to get back to the site if needed. The most likely reason for that would be an audit. If the site's audited, for an audit, they'll have several weeks heads up that they need to get those documents back, but it's good to know upfront just how long is that process. So that is a half an hour of the type of questions that I would ask at a pre-study visit. If you've stuck with me this long and you're interested in seeing videos like this about a site initiation visit, an interim monitoring visit, or a closeout visit, please mention it in the comments. If there's anything else you would like to hear about, both in the worlds of clinical research or in personal finance, which is what I've currently been focusing on, please let me know, and I will try to create videos on these topics. Obviously, this video took me about 30 minutes to create and walk you through a pre-study visit. The site initiation visit, even though it takes longer, a video like this would probably be shorter because I would say I trained the site on the study at a site initiation visit, which is essentially what that is. The pre-study visit is more about assessing the site, and assessing the site has a lot more questions to make sure that this is a site you want to pick. I will leave you with a few monitoring anecdotes from pre-study visits I've done. My favorite was I went to a site, I talked to the coordinator, took a tour, asked all these questions, everything, assessed the site was qualified, site had the equipment, etc. And then I sat with the PI to present the protocol, and literally on the title page, the PI said, "Oh, I have no interest in that study." And I just did not know how to respond to that. I was like, well, then why am I here? Like, somebody should have caught that this site was not interested in this study before I went all the way to be on site and assess the site for the study. But I just remember that PI because she's like, oh yeah, I have no interest in this study. And then I just didn't know what to do because I'm supposed to present this study and ask questions like, hey, what are your recruitment goals, etc. And I was like, oh crap. I now have to write a full report for a site that's not interested. So I did that. I wrote the report. I said the site is qualified, but the PI said that they're not interested in the study, so I don't recommend the site for selection. And that brings me to the report writing, which I did not talk about. Pre-study reports take a while to write because you ask a lot of questions, and ideally you would have some of this detail in the report. Otherwise, there's no real point of asking all these questions if you're not documenting it somewhere. But most, actually, probably all pre-study visits conclude with the question of, do you recommend the site? And I always go back and forth about how to answer this question. So either yes and why, or no and why. I try to make sure that my language is as neutral as possible either way. Yes, I recommend the site based on the PI's participation in similar studies. The site has access to the required study population. The site has X and Y equipment that are needed for the study. And based on this pre-study visit, I would recommend it. Or no, I don't. And very specifically, the site does not have the equipment needed. The PI was not interested in the study, which, yeah, which was only happened once in my career, but was very memorable. Or you could sort of go in between and say the site would be a good backup site for the study. I don't think this is the optimal site for the study, but for these reasons, I would suggest maintaining the site as a backup site if more sites are needed. So that's the report writing aspect, which is oftentimes much longer than the actual pre-study visits take. I like to do my pre-study visits within 90 minutes. It depends if they're on-site or remote. If they're remote, 90 minutes. If they're on-site, maybe 2 hours, because I'll walk around the site and ask questions and try to talk to the coordinator, etc. So that's just the timing. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else, but then once you finish your pre-study visit, once you turn in your report, a determination will be made on site selection, and then a letter will go out to the site saying you're selected, you're not selected, you're potentially a backup site, whatever. The site will be aware of the status. Like I said, my pro tip is if you know somebody else that has worked with the site, they are your best source of knowledge of what working with that site is like. And you can ask any CRA about any site they've ever worked with, do you recommend it or not? And CRAs will have a strong opinion one way or the other. All right, that is everything for this video. As always, a reminder, please hit that like button. Please subscribe to the channel. Like I said, these videos take me a little while. I am trying to get to that 1,000 subscriber mark, and I really appreciate your support. And as always, if there's something you would like me to cover, please list it down in the comments. Thank you.